I'm your planning director, Michael Yee. Next to me is my deputy director, Darren Arai. And on my left side is my administrative services officer, Douglas Lee. I'm glad that we have an opportunity to be the first department after finance to provide you our budget presentation. My presentation will primarily focus on providing you an overview of planning's critical role in shaping the future of the island. Most of the general public knows the planning department as the gatekeeper of permits, variances, subdivisions, farm dwelling units, special permits, rezones, and et cetera. But as you know, the planning department is much more than producing permits. We are the compass to the development of the island, but we got to know where we're going at this point. I kind of should have retitled this after the earlier conversation to kind of Big Island, Big Challenges, kind of the heavyweight of Mauna Loa and stuff on the island. There are two primary urban centers, one in Hilo, one in Kona. We have the visitor industry in Waikoloa and in Kona. We have the underserved growth areas in Puna and in Ocean View. Low population density with small towns, often with rural, residential, and small farms nearby. So that's kind of where our development patterns sit. That's where we're at today. This chart here that I have kind of shows where we've been, which is sprawl. And, we've tried to direct growth by use. Like industrial can go here, residential can go here. And obviously, we've been trying to move toward more sustainable communities. And I say sustainable communities, and that's a very broad statement with a lot of needs and resources to get there. What guides development? We have on one end at the bottom left, we have land use policy and code. That's what I would call our regulatory system. These, you come in, you check on where you can build things, what's the set-asides and setbacks. But then you have, looking forward, our general plan, our CDPs, and that tries to look forward to where we should go. Within that, you have community public participation that tries to affect that, both at the CDP level and at the code changes. And over time, code does change, right? If we didn't evolve, we'd be stuck in doing things like Puna, for decades. So, obviously, community makes a big difference in the system. Before I move on, we often talk about what keeps Hawaii special and what makes us special. And I wanted to dwell on this for a moment in that in the past, there's been a lot of focus around kind of trying to identify what Hawaii means to a lot of tourists. And we get a lot of generic resorts and other developments that if you were in there, you wouldn't know if you were in Florida, California, or Hawaii sometimes. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just understand that doesn't necessarily make us special. Is it better that then we have folks that want to kind of use representations of Hawaii? At the worst part of it might just be cultural appropriation. But it's moving to a certain place where we're trying to get to authenticity. And I often speak, when people ask me what will keep us special, I will talk about authenticity. And when you talk about Hilo and the Big Island, boy, we're made up of authenticity. How we show it off, how we share it with folks is certainly different. A lot of the local authenticity usually is only shared with other locals, right? We don't outwardly share it with everybody else necessarily. But it is something that really, if we talk about specialness, I want us to be able to talk about authenticity in our development. So now to the kind of the guts of the department. We're made up of 4 different divisions: administrative services, administrative permits, which produces the permits, planning, which is really how we interact with the Planning Commission. There's a staff that processes those applications, and then we have long-range planning. In the center of all this, I put community. And the reason I do that is community plays a critical role throughout. For example, a customer applying for a permit, a citizen can provide testimony at a planning commission, or even as a member of an action committee via long-range planning. So we're constantly interacting with citizens. First and foremost, we're known for our regulatory system. Just so you have some numbers for output, we average over 300 complaints a year that we investigate. We have 4 inspectors for the island. We have probably right now close to a month backlog. So if somebody makes a complaint right now, it's probably at least 30 days before, unless it's something critical, that it even gets looked at with an inspector. And note that right now with the proposed transient vacation rental bill, there's nothing in the budget for additional enforcement at this point because the bill hasn't passed. We process over 3,000 permits a year, along with over 16,000 requests. Now, some of that might be duplicated in that 3,000, but basically 16,000, that's about 60 requests a day between 2 offices in Kona and Hilo. That's everything from somebody, a real estate agent wanting some information about a lot that they're looking to purchase with the buyer, to various inquiries about complaints and what their neighbor can or can't do. But it's an onslaught of information that we're providing to the public. The second department function is long-range planning. This division creates the updates to the general plan and to the community development plans. And obviously, these are critical guiding documents for the direction of the island. Within that, our long-range planning staff attend close to 200 plus community meetings a year to make sure we have that engagement with them. I want to share the various boards and commissions that we sit on. Planning staffs the most boards and commissions and committees of any other department here, and that's intensive. That could include secretary to take minutes and notes, doing agendas, processing that, to having planners sit in the meetings to be able to provide advice. So it's staff intensive. Here are the boards and commissions. Each community development plan then has a action committee, and if in this case of Hamakua, you had a steering committee, which will evolve to an action committee soon. Here's the miscellaneous committees and groups, and these are active ones that staff connect with regularly right now. And this is just not all of them. This is not an exhaustive list. Again, this is part of our role as the coordinating agency for the county. We try to balance what's coming in, what's going to impact the county, and be able to disseminate that and put that out to the other departments and information. Before I move on, I do want to also talk a little bit about citizen participation. In 1969, Sherry Arnstein created this ladder of participation. It talks about the different degrees of how people participate. And given my community engagement background, I certainly try to push us to be in the top tier, okay? There are many factors that keep us from being there, okay? Both that are very specific to the state of Hawaii, such as sunshine law, to the local culture of folks being engaged. I say we have a lot of work to do in this area, and the planning department wants to lead that. I mean, it's as simple as trying to change some of our daytime meetings, let's say in Kona, from a 2 o'clock meeting at the Civic Center to a 6 o'clock meeting out in the community. That certainly won't push us to the top tier by just doing that, but again, we have to take some baby steps to get there. And as the planning department, unlike you folks, where you have to conduct business during the day, there are times where we have to be conducting our things out when it's most convenient for our citizens. So I just wanted to share that with you. Moving on to a little bit more detailed of questions maybe. want to just address where we're at the general plan review process. We're looking at getting the draft out soon. With that, then we would go out with further public input on that draft, and hopefully by early part of next year, we're having to bring it to council for adoption. Certainly been a long process, but trying to wind down. Looking forward, you know, what are things that are going to impact our workload, things that we have to adjust to? Without reading this exhaustive list here, I do want to highlight the Hawaii Congress of Planning Officials Conference, which rotates to our island every 5 years. Hilo will host it for the first time this year. The conference is attended by about 300 persons. This year's conference will have 3 focus areas: cultural and historic preservation, climate adaptation and sea level rise, and affordable housing. I think it says a lot that Hilo can host that this year, and it certainly will bring an economic boom for a few days here, but an ability for planning to show off where our island is going planning-wise, and trying to play some leadership role, especially around some cultural issues. You know, we have a Cultural Resource Commission that has really shined the last few years, and we like to show how they've been really playing a key role in how they address development on this island. Other factors. The current budget that I proposed for our department addresses some of the impacts listed here, but not all. The proposed budget does not provide adequate staff and resources for, let's say, the coordination of policy development for climate adaptation and sea level rise. With right now, the state's assuming a 3.5 foot sea level rise by 2050. By their standards, we are the least economically impacted of the islands, but make no mistake, it's going to be a challenge for us. And as the state moves on with its commission that I sit on and trying to develop policy to adjust, it's going to impact us. But right now, there's not a framework for us right now. You know, we'll know more down the road, but right now we're sharing the duties of trying to stay on top of this issue with research and development. The management and operations of Banyan Drive Hawaii Redevelopment Agency, also there's no budget there. We have a request certainly in to fund the EIS, but there's no revenue stream from that. Obviously, we wish the state would participate more on that, and that's where we're going to continue to advocate for it. And as I mentioned, right now there's no budget for short-term vacation rental enforcement. Just kind of a short wish list of if I had additional resources. Clearly, we have an abundance of cultural and historic resources on this island. We are challenged between state processes, you know, permitting process to deliver things in a timely manner. And the risk we run as there's time pressures is we overlook something. And once something is done, we may not be able to take it back. And so having additional staff to help with reviews of permits, especially as they relate to cultural and historic resources, would be helpful. We don't have a public access program. There's not a staff member that truly pays attention to it. Nobody that works with trying to gain them, nobody kind of working directly consistently on creating the easements and the template with Corp Council. But I think it's also important as we talk about a public access program, it shouldn't be just about public access. It has to be about how are we protecting the resource that we're trying to gain access to, because just because it's okay to go to doesn't mean everybody should go to it either. So what are the criteria we have to make around that? And as long as we don't have a program, it's just kind of out there for now. Code changes, I've probably talked to many of you at one time or another about specific code changes that are needed. Everything from just what we need right now to a full blown out revision of our code could certainly be used. Again, that's a big resource that's needed to do that, but we're probably reaching that point where how much do we just want to keep attacking code changes one at a time versus doing an overhaul at some point? That's something to plant in the back of your mind. And lastly, as I mentioned, trying to broaden community participation, and that means, over time when the budget was tough, we kind of cut back on food and some other things, cut back overtime, so we had daytime meetings. But if we are truly to reach out to the community, we need budgets for everything from food to even childcare someday would be helpful. And just wanted to be able to mention that. Next slide on capital improvement projects. So capital improvement projects come through the planning department, and then I forward on a recommendation to the mayor. And this really goes to what Councilmember Chung talked about earlier. If you look at the first bar at the top, in the 27-18 budget, departments requested $175 million worth of projects. By the time that the council added on and adopted the budget was $245 million. The county may fund about $50 million of that. This year, we went out to the department and said, there's going to be less money. Don't submit projects that you really don't know are viable. We still got more and got an $195 million worth of requests. And we still haven't tacked on what the council may adopt. And that came with the Department of Finance telling us there might be $30 million worth of CIP projects this next year. So you can see the large funding gap that we have here. And in these CIP projects that I certainly reviewed, most of them are very important projects. I mean, how do you decide against a sewer project in disrepair to certain roads that certainly need to be repaired? If we continue this trend, we will only fund the most needy projects, bare bones sewer projects, bridges, roads. But other needed things, unless we find other revenue sources, we're not going to be making huge inroads to things. And I don't have a solution except this really hit me as I went through this exercise for the first time really this last year in CIP, that I wanted to share my realization of what we got going on here. Lastly, I'm still an optimist. I still like to dream big. That's what I think planners need to be. And this is a map of the conceptual master plan for Banyan Drive. But what's great about this is this vision came with other pieces that were ahead of it. The downtown Hilo plan, the multimodal planning, complete streets, bayfront trails, economic development initiatives, the harbor plan. This encompassed and was a comprehensive look at how we can improve it. That's what planning does. I hope we don't stop trying to do that because we get mired in the day-to-day of scarcity. As we cut down every department and we lose sight of what we have to do for the future, and that's what I started with, we're going to be run down to just doing the bare bones things that we can do. And that's not going to get us where we need to go. And granted, it's a huge challenge on the county on how to get there. But I think we can kind of see the danger if we don't figure out a way to fund the things we need to fund. And if we stop allowing us to dream bigger. So a little pitch for this, we do have a request through the state for a bill that's requesting for a $250,000 match for the EIS. Right now, we don't have something in the budget for it. I would hope that we can find that, because it's I think a small amount to be able to leverage what would be huge economic impact for the island down the road. With that, thank you.
Thank you, Director Yee.
We talked about the climate change a little bit, so I'm hoping that you're going to continue working with the University of Hawaii, because they had a group, the Climate Adaptation Group. And I know that some of the students were basing their thesis around what was happening in the county and all of that. Can you speak a little bit about that partnership and how will that continue?
through the Climate Adaptation Commission right now, they are gearing up, wanting to have smaller meetings with key folks here on the island. So I was asked that question of who should participate, and there are two things. One is kind of what do they call it? Ground transportation. So how do we green, you know, use more renewable energy for, let's say, public transportation? So that's one initiative they want to kind of get off the ground on each island. The other one is the greater question of how do we adjust to sea level rise. So they're trying to have two working groups on the island to start having those conversations. And so, like I said, R&D and I are kind of are working on how do we pull those groups together for the state.
Yeah, because that will help, definitely help the community prepare, you know, each community. But it also is a big resource
Right.
for your departments and the quality of services I think they offer. So I'd like to see that partnership with the University of Hawaii continue.
I think they'll certainly play a critical role in elevating the issue. How do we educate more? In this case, there's the Environmental Management Commission requested us for a presentation on sea level rise. And so, you know, people are concerned. People want to know. And as we keep elevating the conversation, that will help because, as we said, it's going to have huge economic impact on the island.
Thank you. I'll yield at this time.
Thank you, Director, for being here. I do like your dream big. And I kind of want to start there because I really think we have to find that $250,000 match. I personally, along with you, went to the legislature and advocated really hard for something to happen at Banyan Drive, whether it was regulatory reform or something that we needed to do better back home here at the department level, at the county level, through plan approval or expediting permits. I see that area as exactly what you described it as, kind of that last link to dovetail the harbors, downtown Hilo, Bayfront Parks and Trailways. That is the last link to really invite real capital investment for Hilo. So I do, and I'm looking at Deanna and Nancy over there, we got to figure out $250,000 to match what the state is putting on the table. I think will go a long way. I want to back up a little bit because you mentioned additional resources, and you know, the State Historic Preservation Division, I know, is a very slow process. I also know they just got a new individual here in Hilo. How do we create like a better working relationship with them, and what do you folks need at the county to like have a counterpart? We got to do real good at the county level to help enliven and invite capital investment here. Help me and help share with my other colleagues how we do that a little better.
I'm going to call on my diplomatic speaker, Darren. There have been some changes on SHPD on how we process information and requests, and I'd like him to talk about that change, what really impacted us.
Good morning. Darren Orai, Deputy Planning Director. Sorry about my coughing. I apologize, which means I'll try to keep it short. We've kind of taken the opportunity as a Cultural Resources Commission has continued to evolve over the years since its inception back in 2012. As the commission itself has evolved, so has staff. We've become more familiar with the statutory requirements for historic and cultural preservation, and we also got to understand the mechanics behind how things work and why they work or don't work in any one particular way. So what we have attempted to do is reach out to some of the local SHPD staff, develop a relationship with them, and also try to figure out what do they need from the county as much as we need from them. And we found some areas where we have taking the initiative to improve things, the relationship as well as the resources that builds, that supports the relationship. For example, we're working with SHPD and Public Works to try to refine the application form for grubbing and grading applications, so the information is provided up front and center, so it's not like this type of back and forth thing going on where it goes to SHPD and SHPD says you don't have the right information and it gets bounced back and forth between agencies. There was also two members, the Cultural Resource Commission recently created a subcommittee where two of the commissioners actually went to SHPD and actually started pouring through all of their approved preservation plans and then linking it in GIS. And that was something even SHPD wanted. So, you know, it took this collaborative type of effort to kind of show them, we got your back, so, you know, and I'm sure they have our back as well. So we continue to build, look for these type of opportunities, and we'll continue to promote it because it's what also the commissioners on the CRC wants.
One other question too, which has been at the forefront of my mind since starting, was the code. And we keep putting in Band-Aid fixes. What is it gonna take for a comprehensive adjustment? Is this something, do we dedicate a staff member to, or do we shove it out for some 89-day contract hire to evaluate and give back to us? I'm a little, there's a lot of moving pieces in this one. And, you know, I proposed a parking change, and then now I'm learning that it's not a good fit for our vacation rental issues, and so we have to readjust that, and we spend so much time taking tiny little sections of the code, running it through its processes here at the committee level, then back down to the planning commission level to only come back up and only really not move the needle very much. Help me understand that. I need a roadmap. Is it a comprehensive change, or do we look at just specific sections of the code and adjust them appropriately?
I'll try to take a diplomatic stab at it. As you may all be aware, you know, we spent a lot of years, a lot of resources, and a lot of time developing the vision. Granted, you know, we need a lot more vision, but we're working on a general plan update now. We've developed a number of community development plans that have been adopted by ordinance. The last time we did a comprehensive amendment to the zoning code was, I believe, in 1996. I think the last time we touched the subdivision code was probably back in the mid to late 70s. That's how long it's been. And as you know, it's nice to have the vision, but you need the tools to drive it onto the ground. And the subdivision and zoning codes are those very devices that helps us achieve that. I totally agree. It's been Band-Aid each step along the way. We need a comprehensive look. Someone, and the department itself and all of its staff, when we last did it in '96, every single staff member had a role in looking at it, vetting it, saying the areas that you administer day in and day out, take a hard look at it and see if it's practical, if it makes sense, if it can work. We envision that same approach, but we do probably need some resources outside of the department because, as the director mentioned, we're so consumed nowadays on just trying to do the day-to-day stuff that we struggle to try to frame the vision. So that's where we may look at hopefully some resources in the future to help guide us. We know how to do the work, but sometimes we don't know what processes it requires in order to frame that entire vision that would result in a comprehensive code adjustment or change.
My final question, with the general plan update, will some of that framework be contained in the general plan, or are we going to be looking at having to start another vision on making changes to our subdivision code along with our zoning code?
Generally speaking, the general plan won't have items in it that's changing the code. I mean, if it's referring to specific codes that are already existing, it will certainly have sections that makes the recommendations for the specific code changes, and that will be clear.
Director, your slide, Dream Big. One of the great things about getting a little bit older and you get a little bit more vision challenge, makapa, is that when I read the top, instead of seeing tomorrow, comma, land use, I saw Tomorrowland. I was thinking about Disneyland. I thought, that's pretty visionary. The point on that is, and you touched on it, was being visionary going forward. And I don't know, maybe you should drop the comma in there and just call it Tomorrowland, because that may actually be where we're headed. The thing is, and Councilwoman Leloy touched on it, as far as putting a Band-Aid on our code and coming forward, and what the deputy just said about where we touched the what do I want to say, the land use, the subdivision code back in the 70s. Okay, fast forward, we're 40 plus years. And recently we were at the transportation meeting that was in part hosted by Department of Transportation, and we had Beth Osborne from the Transportation for America, and she was speaking on that. And this isn't all your area of concern, but it is part. And one comment she made was that we're not going to fix our transportation concerns until we fix our zoning and we fix our land use, how we get along with that. And so I've been thinking about that and mindful of that. When you say we haven't worked on the subdivision codes for 40 plus years, I'm thinking we're becoming outdated. The old style was, rambling home, 2.3 children. We had this vision of what we thought America was supposed to be. And I think we're evolving through that. And so I'm very pleased to hear what we're talking about going forward. But in order to fix that, we have to have the resources to employ the people to do that. We're not going to have the resources unless we have the economy that'll support that, which comes back around to impart planning and public works. And one of the things that, and you've heard this all before, is that our permitting process is cumbersome and slow. And one of my concerns with all of that, and I understand why we have some of it in place, but to streamline, and again, it was touched on earlier, I think we are slowing down our economy a bit because we're slowing down the permitting process. And that concerns me. If we want the resources, and it's kind of the chicken or the egg, we need both at the same time, which obviously we can't have. But coming back around, unless we pick that up, we're not going to be able to afford the resources that we need to do that. And so I don't think there's an easy answer here, but I fully appreciate the fact that we've got to start thinking in grander context and go for that Tomorrowland vision. And so from your perspective, how do we get away from, the term I've used is this silo thinking, and be more inclusive? Sitting with Public Works, having a working group, how do we pick this up and actually plan for 50 years from now, not 5 years from now?
So I'm probably going to come at this from a different angle than you might have thought. Especially not coming from government before and coming into this position, I see things. Part of what ails certain initiatives is I'm an appointed director for 4 years. I may or may not have a job. So what do I choose to work on in those 4 years becomes, political, right? Second, you have a full council turnover every 2 years, which I had no idea happened until I got here. And I'm like, wow. Boy, can you imagine having to get a new date every 2 years and having to reestablish that situation? I mean, where I came from Washington State, transportation projects were just death because politicians never lasted long enough to want to be a champion of a transportation project because it would never pay off politically for them. So can you imagine when you're sitting in your chairs for 2 years, you know, what do you choose to focus on? So one angle may be around having more, you know, kind of ad hoc committees between mayor, department staff, council staff that attack certain key issues, you know, such as code change. No, I don't know, but when there's not a commonality to what needs to be championed, people will, you know, go back to their comfort zone of their own silo and just say, okay, what am I going to accomplish in my 2 years, 4 years? You know, what are my pressing priorities? In this case, it could just be producing the widgets of permits versus having to dream big. It's you know, I'm sure every government agency, you know, is kind of faced with that kind of bureaucracy and change, but for some reason it seems to be a little more hyper here on our island, more challenging. So I'm not sure I really answered your question very well.
Actually, Director, you answered it quite well. It doesn't give us the answer, but I didn't expect that. But it does give me information as far as your thought process, which is outside the box, which I totally appreciate. I yield.
Thank you, Mr. Richards.
Law Director, thank you for presenting that. You know, to me, like, in how we look at the past and how we look at the future, your department is one of the most important ones in how we progress and move forward and figure out where our communities are going to be, where our people are going to be, where we're going to live, how we're going to recreate. I mean, it all encompasses under what you guys plan for. And, you know, really without responsible, proper planning, we'll be in La La Land or Tomorrowland or who knows what you want to call it. But that's why I put a lot of emphasis on how these plans are taken care of. You know, I love the grand ideas and what could possibly happen, but sometimes, you know, responsibly, are we planning for too much, or do we have this big, huge vision without the necessary resources to complete this vision? That's what you were talking about. You know, we can have all these things put together, but without the backing of all these different components, money included, it's not going to happen. So again, that's the responsible part of what you guys do, and really looking, you know, the general plan. It's still waiting for that. Was there a timeline on when it's going to get finished, or?
Yeah, the general plan is slated to be hopefully adopted early next year.
Okay. Just briefly upon the budget aspect, was there anything from your budget that you guys ended up cutting?
We cut some funding for the Hawaii Congress Planning Officials Conference. So there was a line item that the county does help fund the conference. So we cut some of those funds. We, you know, we're
In terms of overall budget, was there an increase or a decrease?
Douglas, the Administrative Service Officer. After the most recent round of cuts, there was a net decrease to our budget, you know, with some of the recommendations that we discussed with Finance.
Okay, and the additions that you're wanting were the ones that you talked about, kind of a general sense of with additional funds, this is what you can do?
Yeah.
And I know that 250,000 is one of those items, but I'm kind of going along with what Ms. Leloy was bringing up. You know, greater preservation of cultural and historic resources. You know, in the beginning you talked about what makes Hawaii unique and special. And really, the foundation of that is the community, definitely. But that includes, to me, the land, the people, of course, how we take care of it, how we preserve and look at the cultural and historic, resources in its totality. And to me, that's kind of like really what makes the foundation of who we are, as a people, as Hawaii. Why do people come here? That's why we come. That's why people come here. And truly, that's a huge part of, what you said in the beginning. And so that's why it's kind of, if we don't give you additional resources, or if there isn't anything within your budget to take care of some of this foundational type of thing of what makes Hawaii Hawaii, then what are we going to do? Yeah.
Well, currently we have a Planner 6 that staffs the Cultural Resource Commission, and that person certainly guides a lot of what you just talked about. But that's just one person. And, unfortunately, we just lost the best person we ever had in that position. Lucas Mead went to Kamehameha schools. And hopefully, we'll hire somebody just as good. But it is tough to find planners, with really high regulatory experience that also have the local cultural, experience. It's not easy to find. But we could use more of it. That's for sure.
So first, finding somebody to fit that spot. And secondary, finding additional people.
Correct. For instance, if I had a second person, could I create an agreement with SHPD to, let's say, create a GIS layer map around all our cultural and historic areas of the island? So we would have this overlay, so when permits come in, when somebody checks on a specific parcel, we would sit there and kind of get red flagged for, we better make sure we research this area a little bit more. We don't have a layer like that. We generally kind of know, we know the areas, but we don't have a tool that our planners can readily use. And if that was made readily available to then other folks working in other departments, then we're helping to protect these resources better. Just one example.
In terms of the inspectors, you said they were kind of a month behind a lot of these different, a month behind on going out to see all these inspections. But how many more inspectors would you need to keep up with demand, I guess?
I know in my supplemental request, which you don't see in your budget, and again, trying to balance all the different county needs, I requested 2. I've also heard from the other islands, from Maui and Kauai, they have at least 2 to 4 inspectors just to handle vacation rentals.
No.
So that kind of scared me that I might have certainly undershot my request. But I also know if I came in with 4, I'm not going to get that. I'm a little too realistic. So, yeah, I think minimum we need 1 on each side just to help with the caseload. And that doesn't even address, let's say, if the vacation rental bill came through, having to do initial registration and those things. But that's being looked at through the bill to be able to address that.
Yeah, we'll address that when it comes up.
Quickly on code changes, when I was speaking to the planning director of Kauai, Michael DeHillig, he had mentioned that they have a consultant right now working on their code changes. Mm-hmm. So they paid an outside person to do it. It'd be interesting for me to find out, what that cost is, how long that took, and at least be prepared to answer a more specific question about what could it take for us to go down the road.
So I know you said your supplemental budget is prepared already, and we don't have it. In addition to those inspectors, what else are we going to see?
There were 4 primary ones. One was another planner for cultural and historic preservation. 2 was for inspectors. And a third and a fourth, both related, was Planner 6 administrative permits. One in the Kona office, one in the Hilo office. And that was to help coordinate some of the things we were talking about, making sure our let's say if there are things from CDPs, code changes that we need a staff person to actually process that, think about it, present it, write the background on it. We'd be able to move forward on certain code changes that we need right away. And so it was adding a higher level administrative permits to coordinate broader issues for the planning department.
Thank you, and thank you for letting us know, because I want to hear, what we're going to be prepared to see at the next supplemental budget, which right now we don't have that opportunity to see, and obviously I can tell that it's going to be if you're going to come in with those additional positions, it's going to be a lot bigger down the road. So mahalo for the preparation, but I think that's all I have at this time. I really do want to bring back the cultural commission in front of the council to see really you talked about how important they are and the great strides that they're taking. I haven't seen, or heard a lot from them, so I'd really like to hear them come back or come to the council and just give us an update about that. I did want to also ask briefly about what's happening with the Kona CDP. I know there's been meetings with the action committee and the subcommittees. I haven't gone to a lot of those meetings, but I know Ms. Eoff has. What changes or potential changes are we looking at to help better implement the Kona CDP? I think that's kind of what the focus of a lot of these meetings are.
The subcommittee that was reviewing the revisions at the Kona Action Committee submitted the recommendation to the full committee at the last meeting, and that was passed. So the full committee now has to vote on that, which should happen. The general gist of the revisions have basically evolved around, dealing with the should and shall issues of the Missler case. But the general gist is, if there were problems with the CDP that was also preventing certain development, that we couldn't lighten that up, that we would try to adjust for that now. I wouldn't say it's been a full blown out revision of the CDP in that way, but certainly that was another kind of secondary issue to help alleviate what people saw as a moratorium, or what was a moratorium on development in certain ways out in Kona. So I think we're pretty close to having the revisions adopted.
I'll let other council members talk, but thank you very much. I'll yield at this time.
Regarding our culture here and how development is going to enhance that or hurt that. A couple of things. One, something you said about the will of politicians may switch, every 4 years or even every 2 years with this body. But wasn't that the purpose of developing community development plans, was to have community-driven vision outlive maybe the change through administrations? And can we rely more on, now that we've got kind of an emphasis back on the community development plans and how the action committees are helping to implement those visions, can we, and doing the general plan update, can that kind of be your focus to make sure that, these do outlive priorities of different administrations?
I totally agree that the CDPs are there to help prioritize. The thing is, most of those priorities take money, and a lot of them also involved capital improvement projects.
Right.
I mean,
so that kind of
the big
directs
vision.
where priorities should be.
And so that's my case. When we're only funding 30 to 50 million out of 200 plus, there are a lot of projects that are really necessary in our communities to make them better. And again, how do we fill that gap? Could be more taxes. Mr. Chung has talked about how do we find more revenues. Yeah, that's it. But I would also say, if I had a magic wand, I would certainly propose that one of my great experiences has been around working with the community matching fund program, where funds are made available to community groups where they match. It could be 1-for-1, sometimes less than that, depending on the project, where it could fund projects up to $250,000 for a match. So you have $500,000 projects happening in communities, but they can also be as small as $1,000 things. Where you folks have your discretionary funds that you put out the little projects, maybe all that gets consolidated in a matching fund, and somewhere the county finds funding for that from other sources. Where then, and I'm certainly not purporting that planning does it, but another department that's readily capable of managing a grant program could really help administer taking applications in from communities. But then you use the citizenship to find those partnerships with private entities too, to have these community projects go forward. That's leveraging the P3, to be able to accomplish some things.
The body of knowledge and that commission itself is evolving and maturing, but it seems to me like they don't have enough power. They're only a recommended, they recommend, right? Advisory, yes. So is there some way that, changing their authority a little bit, or?
I don't know legally, I'm not the legal expert by any means on how we could change them to have greater authority, but I will say they have been a force on certain applications coming forth
I saw
lately.
some of that.
It is tough to go toe-to-toe with folks like Teresa Dunham, who spent her career at Shipty, or with the Nicole Louie in Kona. When they're speaking to what they know, it is hard for developers to say, no, we're not going to do that, right? Mm-hmm. And I'll give you a good example where it used to be in some cases developers may provide more information further down the process. The commission's been able to say, for us to really understand what's going on, we need to know now. You need to go in front of Bureau of Counsel now and find out what needs to happen. And by them asking, it has made folks adjust to it. And they may not have all the authority backing it, but there seems to have been enough that it's been nudging in the right direction, I feel, positively.
And I think some of us are going to be attending a Hawaiian Law Conference that's geared towards helping legislators understand some of our responsibilities, which, all of those things are kind of a growing, I guess, not trend, but it's the level of importance is rising.
That training was attended by Amy Self on corporate counsel for us, along with Lucas Mead last year, and they thought it was fabulous. I know, and Susan Leloy. I also know there's an OHA bill that was making its way through the state ledge that was going to require certain training related to that of all council members and planning commissioners and planning directors, which, at last check, it was moving through the legislature.
Right, and these are really things that are not just nice to do, but they're actually legally mandated of decision-making bodies. So, okay, and then I know we can't talk too much about the short-term vacation rental legislation coming up, but we definitely do need to make sure that our resources are allocated towards implementation, given that it's supported by the administration, and we'll see how the council helps. But yeah, so I know that there's nothing there now because there's nothing to enforce. But yeah, well, thank you. I also appreciate your creative thinking and the fact that maybe you didn't come from government, but you're new to government, but you're bringing a lot of community-driven values and ideas to government, which is really important, I think, to all of us. So we'll take regarding the supplemental budget, it kind of raises another issue for us that we don't really get to see. I don't think the positions and where they're going to be devoted by the different departments in their ask or in their supplemental budgets. So that is something I think we do need to look at so I better understand where your priorities are, if they're shifting or if they're, how much help we can assist by looking at those positions.
I quickly need to cover that when I asked for $250,000, I definitely do not want that to come at the expense of another department. That's a request of a magic wand. If there's a magic pool of money that appears somehow, I would love to have that 250, but I certainly do not want on the backs of other departments that are
We understand.
starving for
That's hard to-
priorities. Yeah, just wanted to be sure I clarified that. And as for supplemental, it's things that I want and that planning needs to do, would like to do, but it's also by informing you know kind of what's out there, right? It's just because there are also shared coordination issues. It's not just within the realm of planning. And that's why it's important for me to share that with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to focus on something that Ms. Eoff just mentioned about that Native Hawaiian class. And I actually would rather encourage, if you're planning on attending, maybe pool our money to bring them here so that we could actually create a class here so that we could get more peers at the table to listen to these experts. Just something rather than an individual, I went, myself went, Lucas went, the wealth of knowledge. All of the cases that they spoke of was Hawaii Island cases. And I think if we partnered with OHA, and this is the 3P program, right? We took our money, OHA money, and brought those individuals here and then invited people to attend here, we could actually get a bigger buy-in and more people championing a conversation about keeping Big Island authentic to our cultural resources. I just want to put that on the table for you folks. I loved every minute of it. It was the most I've learned probably in the last 5 years as far as land use and as it pertains to Native Hawaiian issues. Just think about it. I don't want to get too far off topic, but we've got Haleola up at the university, which would be a perfect venue. We have students here in our Native Hawaiian classes. I think we could fill an auditorium and actually help pay for those people to come here rather than you use DAE or 3 others. I don't know. Maybe that's a better way to leverage it. Just food for thought. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Leroy. That's a great suggestion. Ms. O'Hara?
I have some minor questions and maybe a bigger overarching question, but I see when you say you have most committees of any department, which you probably do, under the miscellaneous committees and groups, I just had a question. You have in here the Pahoa Village Steering Committee, yet in January of 2017, the planning department informed them that they would no longer be supporting that committee, so I'm not sure if that's the proper thing to have on here, or should it be design review? Because when Pahoa became a design review district and you formed the design review committee, which is under the action committee, that one is still being supported by planning.
Sorry, I could have easily made a mistake here. I know there was something that was also Pahoa that I had deleted that per a request from a staff member, so I could have easily made mistakes. So
Okay, well, yeah, I just wanted to clarify that because what was the Pahoa Village Steering Committee continues to meet, but we were told it was simply a community group and they can do whatever they want. So just trying to clarify that.
Okay.
It's a minor point. The general plan, I know you were very optimistic when you came in and you didn't come from government, so you thought things would move maybe faster than perhaps they did. But we're still kind of rolling behind on the Pahoa Master Plan. It's going to be in contract soon, I understand. And so we can get rolling on that. It's about probably a 2-year process to get that done. And the general plan we had hoped would be on the table for our adoption this year, but it sounds like it's rolling over another year. But that's all a huge body of work, all of those things. But doing a code overhaul is a huge body of work that we really, really need to get on. Our code is atrocious in conflicting languages all over the place, leaving it up to interpretation by individuals and departments from yours to building to it. It just, we need that. And I would love to see, on top of the $250,000 that you would like to see for a public-private partnership projects in community, I would like to see the money for a consultant contract to get us moving on that. There is no way that with currently staffed, the planning department's going to be able to do that. And it's so much needed. We are operating under such archaic code. It's high on my list of things that need to get done.
Councilmember O'Hara, I totally agree with you.
I know how integral your department is to everything we do here at the county.